in accent variation in speech perception and production in bilingual and monolingual populations. Currently, she is a part of the Embracing Linguistic Diversity Satellite, a working group developing a series of initiatives to celebrate linguistic diversity and minimize language-based prejudices and disadvantages. Today, she will deliver her talk on accent comprehension and accent bias in a first and second language. Dr. Gisela, please press on your talk.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, say again?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Should I start?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. So about the talk, my initial plan was to talk about accent comprehension and accent bias in the first and second language, but I've realized that that's quite ambitious. So I'll be focusing on ongoing research on these topics for first language listeners. And then if we have time in the question period, I'm very happy to answer questions about the research we've started with second language listeners as well. So I've structured my talk in 3 parts. The first one will be a brief background focusing on how we use accent variation as listeners. And then I'll talk about how we use variation in comprehension. So for this, I'll focus on 2 studies, one of them that uses eye tracking, and the second one uses reaction times as the measure. And then finally, I'll talk about accent variation as a source of bias, and I'll briefly discuss a study we're currently conducting in the UK higher education context. So very, very briefly, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, as I've seen that there's people from very different backgrounds attending. When I talk about accent variation, I'm referring to variation in language at the level of pronunciation only. So differences in terms of how vowels and consonants are produced, differences in rhythm, in intonation, and so on. For example, the word bath tends to be pronounced with the short front vowel in the north of England, so something like bath, but with a long back vowel in the south of England, so bath. So that's an example of an accent feature and how I'll be referring to that term. So accent variation is influenced by a wide range of factors, such as regional origin, like in this example, social background, language background, and we can use variation as well to express and negotiate our identity, to show affiliation to people we like, or to accentuate differences from people we don't like. And these processes are cross-linguistic, so all languages have different accents that depend on a number of factors. But for this talk, the studies that I'll be talking about focus on British English accents. So how do we deal with all of this variation from the point of view of the listener? When we hear someone speak for the first time, even if we can't see them, we're able to make inferences about the background based solely on their speech. For example, if you heard me over the phone, you may be able to guess my gender, perhaps my age range, or something about my language background. You may also be able to guess my emotions, so if I sound very happy and excited, or if I sound bored and interested. And hopefully you'd be able to do that at the same time as you're understanding what I'm saying. So linguistic and non-linguistic information are intertwined in the speech signal. And how we manage to understand the linguistic message and extract non-linguistic information at the same time is not fully understood. This is very much work in progress in the discipline of Socio-Phonetics and speech perception. So in the rest of the presentation, I'll talk about the role of accent variation in speech comprehension. So how it influences how we decode the linguistic message, and how in some cases, accent variation can function as a source of bias. So I'll start with the role of accent variation in speech comprehension. In some of the literature on speech comprehension, and here I may use the word speech processing too as a synonym, accents have been depicted in a rather negative way. So as a problem we need to solve, a hindrance or an obstacle to comprehension. And this is partly because we know that understanding unfamiliar accents that we've never heard before, has a processing cost. This has been shown in experimental work like studies by Adank and colleagues and Fletcher and colleagues. But we've probably also have had this experience ourselves, that when we hear a person with an accent we hadn't encountered before, particularly in a noisy situation like a restaurant, like on the photo, or on the phone where the signal is deteriorated and we have no visual cues, we may find it difficult to understand that person at first. And this becomes even more difficult if we're listening to an unfamiliar accent, so again, an accent we haven't heard before, in a second language. However, it's not all bad news. We also know that listeners can rapidly adapt to novel talkers and novel accents. So, for example, in a series of experiments, Bradlow and colleagues presented American English listeners with English spoken by talkers with different first language backgrounds. So, for example, Japanese, Korean, Arabic, or Spanish as the first language. They found that American English listeners adapted to all talkers over the course of the experiment. And crucially, they were able to generalize their learning in two different ways. So after hearing multiple speakers from one language background, they were better with new speakers from that language background. And after hearing speakers from multiple language backgrounds, they were better with speakers of novel accents they hadn't even been exposed to during the experiment. So another way to think about it is, if variation is inherent to language, we must also be able to use it somehow in comprehension. In fact, we know that when the accent is familiar, so when we've been exposed to it before, we are able to tune into regularities in the accent to make predictions about what comes next. Perceived information about the speaker has been shown to influence the speech comprehension, arguably facilitating it. So, for example, Elizabeth Strand in 1999 showed that when presented with pairs of words like sip and ship, participants selected different words depending on whether the picture they saw was a man or a woman. We can see an illustration of what the photos they used, like in the experiment, would look like on the left. They weren't these ones exactly, but that's how they manipulated the photos. Other experiments have shown similar findings when presenting listeners with speakers of different ages. And we can see some photos from the actual experiment on the right, and different regions. So this work demonstrates that perceived information of the speaker is integrated when we recognize sounds and words. So it is used when understanding speech. So I will report results from two studies I conducted in collaboration with Robert Lennon and Bronwyn Evans on the role of regional variation in speech processing. And for the first study, as I said before, we used eye tracking. We wanted to investigate whether listeners can use sound contrast from another accent to speed up processing. And previous work, as I just shown you on the slide, the previous slide, used pictures or words to cue a specific social category like gender, age, or region. And they did that explicitly with the photos. But we wanted to use a more implicit cue. So we embedded words in a carrier sentence, that's just a sentence around the target word. And we use that feature that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. So the word in, the vowel, in words like bath. We used a short front vowel to cue a Northern British accent. I'm asking you to access, and then the target word. And we use the long back vowel to cue a Southern British accent. So I'm asking you to access. And and I'll explain the difference this a bit more in the methods. So we looked at pairs of words that contain a contrast that is used to convey meaning in one accent, but not in another. So in this case, I'll present data from what's called the footstrap lexical sets, which are a feature that's known for distinguishing northern and southern varieties of English spoken in England, so similar to Bath. In this case, northern varieties tend not to contrast the vowels in the two lexical sets, but so they have just one realization for both, for all of those words. But southern varieties do tend to have a contrast. And I'll play this, but I don't remember if I clicked share sound, so I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. So this is the northern accent. I'm not sure if that played. And the southern accent. Okay. So on the map on the left, you can now see what's called the isoglosses for these two features. So for footstrat, that is the solid line, and then for Bath, the dash line, and an isogloss just represents an accent boundary for a particular feature. Okay, so it's important to note that for northern listeners who don't have a footstrat contrast, strat does not exist as a category in the phonological repertoire, in the sound inventory. So we know from researching cross-linguistic speech perception, like for example, Kathy Best's perceptual assimilation model, that when we hear a new category that doesn't exist in our phonological repertoire, so this happens when we're perceiving the speech in a second language, for example, the new category is assimilated to the nearest native category. And then we also know from spoken word recognition literature that words containing phonological contrasts which do not exist in the native phonetic repertoire create increased lexical competition for second language learners. So that means that those words delay how long it takes to recognize a word from our mental dictionary. So based on this, we could hypothesize that northern listeners will hear strat through the foot category, and this contrast may slow down processing for them. So we used a 2x2 design with two speaker accents, Leeds as the northern accent and Southern Standard British English as the southern accent. So I'll play them again. So that's the northern accent with the short vowel in asking, and the southern accent with the long vowel in asking. And hopefully you could hear the difference in the target word as well. And then we had two participant groups, Northern and Southern English listeners. So we considered Northern listeners as the experimental group and Southern listeners as the control group. Like in previous works, such as Duncan colleagues, we assume that SSB is a familiar accent for Northern listeners because they have extensive exposure to the accent on the media. And we also need to acknowledge that this is the standard accent in the UK, or in England at least. So they're not exactly the same in terms of social status. So we conducted a word recognition task using eye tracking. We presented listeners with pairs of printed words containing these lexical sets, where one of the words was the target and the other one a competitor. So for each trials, participants heard the target word while they clicked on, they had a target word and then they clicked on the word they heard. And while they were doing this, the eye movements were recorded in real time. This method is called the visual world paradigm, and it has been extensively used in psycholinguistic research to examine the systematic relationships between eye movements and speech processing. So to give you an example, listeners heard, I'm asking you to access bus, either in a Leeds or an SSBE accent, and they had to click on the word on the screen. And we also had filler sets with other vowels to make sure participants weren't aware of the vowel sound we were looking at. So for example, I'm asking you to access leg. We collected language background information from the listeners and production data, so we knew how they produced these words. So we wanted to know whether northern listeners would differ from southern listeners when processing sound contrasts that only exist in SSB and not in their own accent. Or whether they would be able to use them in the same way as SSB listeners. So given that footstrap is not a native contrast for northern listeners, as I mentioned before, our initial hypothesis coming to this experiment was that they may not be able to use it in SSB to disambiguate pairs of words earlier. Whilst our control group, southern listeners, would be able to do this. So here we have the results. The figure shows the raw proportion of looks to the target and the competitor over time when southern listeners heard words in the Leeds and SSB accents. So I'll explain, I'll try to break down what the graph shows. So the y-axis shows the proportion of looks to the target for the solid line, for the big curves. So that was, for example, in the pair that we showed before, bus, when they hear I'm asking you to access bus. And then the dashed line shows the looks to the competitor, so the other word in the pair. So in the example we had before, that was book. And now the accent of the speaker here is color-coded, so we have SSB in blue and Leeds in yellow. And the graph shows the results for southern listeners only, which were our control group. So we can see that for the blue lines, southern listeners stop looking at the competitor very quickly. So I think you may be able to see my mouse here. So at 250 milliseconds, they start looking at the target only. So that's for the blue line. However, for the Leeds accent in yellow, listeners disambiguate the two words a bit later, so almost like 200 milliseconds later, around here, and start looking only at the target then, deciding that that's the word they heard. So far, this is in line with our predictions for southern listeners. But let's look at northern listeners. So we now have northern listeners on the left, and we can see that they show a very similar pattern for target looks. They looked at target words earlier when hearing the SSB speakers. And to analyze this data, we used generalized additive mix models, which enabled us to look at the whole curve, but I won't go into any detail in the talk. But the model did show a main effect of speaker's accent, but not listener's accent, suggesting that both northern and southern listeners benefited from the distinction between foot and strap in processing. So that was a surprising finding for us. So we decided to, we wanted to replicate the study, but the pandemic happened, so we couldn't collect face-to-face data in the lab. So we decided to try and replicate it with a different methodology using an online study and reaction times. So instead of the eye tracking data and recording eye movements, we asked participants to press Z on the keyboard when they heard the word on the left and M when they heard the word on the right. And we measured how fast they did that. We distributed the experiment online through a platform called Prolific, and we recorded how fast participants identified the target words by recording the reaction times. We revised our hypothesis based on our previous findings, and we now predicted that SSB foot strap contrasts would facilitate processing for northern listeners too. So reaction times would be faster for SSB pairs of words containing the foot strap contrasts for both listeners. And this time we got it right. So reaction times were faster for SSB foot strap words for both listener groups, replicating our eye tracking findings with a different method. So what does this all mean? We found that there's an overall benefit for all listeners from having the phonetic distinctions in the speech signal, in this case, in the SSBE accent. Overall, Northern listeners were able to use these distinctions in a familiar accent to speed up processing. So this finding indicates that listeners are able to use contrasts that don't exist in their native repertoire when processing or adapting to a different accent when the accent is familiar. And familiarity here is probably key, as the sounds of SSBE are not new to Northern listeners. They've been exposed to them for their whole lives, as I mentioned before, through the media or perhaps through people they know as well. So these two studies provide further evidence that we do exploit accent information for comprehension, and that accent variation is not always an obstacle, but it can be used to facilitate comprehension in some cases, and is built into processing when the accent is familiar. Okay, so a quick recap of what we've seen so far. I've discussed how even if an unfamiliar accent may initially hinder comprehension, we can quickly adapt to new accents and talkers. And our two studies showed that when listening to a familiar accent, listeners can use sound contrasts that don't exist in their native repertoire. So these studies showed that we don't discard accent-related variation in the process of comprehension, but instead it's built into how we process language. So let's now move on to the second part of the talk, which is much shorter. And think about what we do with that accent-related information beyond comprehension. So we've seen that learned associations between accent features and social groups are useful for inferring speakers' characteristics and in turn aiding speech comprehension. An example of these associations could be this person must be Scottish or this person is a second language speaker. The problem comes when we extend those judgments to stereotypical views about the social group who uses those accent features. So this process has been referred to as linguistic stereotyping. Across languages, certain accents may trigger judgments such as posh or intelligent or not intelligent, uneducated, and so on. And these evaluations are completely unrelated to the characteristics of the accent. No sounds are inherently better than others. In fact, we may evaluate the same sound in a different way depending on the context. So I'll use another example here from English. Saying the word car without pronouncing the r sound in spelling is considered standard in England, but not in Scotland or in the US, where not pronouncing the R sound could be in fact considered regional or working class. So these negative evaluations of accents are biases. We all have many cognitive biases developed as we grew up to deal with large amounts of information. And we can think of them as cognitive shortcuts. These biases can become problematic. So in this case, accent-based judgments can often work as a proxy for other speakers' characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, social class, and so on. So this is not just a linguistic issue. It has negative consequences for people's everyday lives, right? It has been shown that people are disadvantaged due to their accent that they speak in terms of access to housing in the US, access to jobs and promotions, as well as other aspects like credibility on radio broadcasts. And the positive evaluation of some accents over others may lead to inequalities in other areas. For example, technology being developed first for what are considered standard accents. So I'll tell you a bit more about the UK context. There's an ongoing project entitled Accent Bias in Britain, investigating attitudes towards different accents in the UK and looking at the consequences of those attitudes in one of the real-world contexts I mentioned, so access to jobs. They have an excellent website with lots of resources that I have added there. And so over the last 50 years, extensive research in the field of sociolinguistics has revealed the existence of systematic attitudes towards different British accents. The standard accents, also sometimes referred to as SSBE, as I said before, or RP, received pronunciation, is considered to have higher status than urban working class accents like Birmingham or Liverpool, or accents that are referred to ethnic in the academic literature, such as multicultural London English, or non-native accents, such as Spanish English or Chinese English. So the Accent Bias Project replicated previous large studies on attitudes. They presented over 800 listeners with 38 accent labels and asked them to rate them on a scale according to how prestigious they thought they were. And they found that attitudes to accents were largely unchanged. So here's a subsection of the accents they tested and the results for the prestige ratings, replicating previous studies in the 60s and 2004. A great aspect of this project is that they also looked into possible solutions. So they evaluated interventions designed to make people, and in particular recruiters, more aware of the potential for accent bias. And their findings showed that all strategies had a positive effect on ratings, especially the strategy of raising awareness through bias training. So very quickly, I'll just tell you about the final study where we looked at accent bias in UK higher education. So universities are no exception to the existence of linguistic bias and discrimination. And here's an example of a recent report of accent discrimination and bullying of university students published on The Guardian in October 2020. In March 2021, we decided to conduct a survey to find out more about these issues in our closest context, which was the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies at the University of Leeds. We asked students about several aspects of their experience. For example, the importance they gave to being taught different accents, but also whether they had felt at a disadvantage due to the accents or languages they speak in the first or second language. And we found that 102 students, from the 102 students who responded, 23% of them reported to have felt at a disadvantage because of their accents or language, or their accents or languages often or very often. And we also elicited comments from them, which highlighted that this sometimes prevented them from participating in class. And this included students with English as their first and second languages. Some students also reported feeling pressure to change the way they speak, often with Northern English accents. So in April 2021, we decided to form a network called Embracing Linguistic Diversity to try to improve these issues at our university and hopefully in the future beyond the university. And our main goals are to celebrate linguistic diversity and design initiatives to try to minimize language-based discrimination. So that's our website on the slide in case you're interested and you'd like to get in touch. Do watch this space for more findings about this. Okay, so to recap this section, I have discussed how learned associations between accent features and stereotypes, so accent biases, may lead to discrimination. And I've talked about how accent-related discrimination takes place in different domains, including the university context. But I've also mentioned that there's hope regarding how to change these issues. So, for example, the Accent Bias Project has shown that with training, it's possible to learn to switch off those biases when making decisions about hiring, for example. So in future research and practice, we can create ways and find solutions for improving this problem. Okay, so thank you all very much for listening. And thanks and acknowledgements as well to my colleagues and RAs who've helped with the research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loredo. It was really wonderful talk on accent bias. Any question from the audience side? Yes. Dr. Kumar, you please come over here. So here we have one of the keynote speakers is going to ask you a question on accent bias.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loredo, for your wonderful keynote. I've got just one question, because you mentioned it towards the end that we should avoid biases which are, one result of accent. And I'm going to present next session, and which is based on Socio-Phonetics, right? like how can we relate your accent with your social background or your regional background. And of course, we can't really get rid of your, a phonetic repertoire, which you also mentioned during your talk. So, like I'm calling it your phonetic features. I'm not calling them accent biases. So, can you please elaborate this point a bit further? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. No, should I go ahead?
Yes, Prof.
Yeah.
Please go on.
No, so as I said, phonetic features, we know they're related to social characteristics, and as listeners, we recognize that. So as I said before, we can recognize perhaps if someone is from a particular part of a country, or many other aspects, and that is not a problem. The problem is when, for example, in a context when we're interviewing people, and to hire them for a particular position, we use the accent to make inferences about things like their intelligence or the level of education or things like that. That's when those biases may become a problem, because they may lead to discrimination or inequalities. So I hope I have explained that okay.
Thank you, Rob. One question from my side, ma'am. You mentioned in your first slide that you investigated your finding or result by using eye tracking and reaction time. So what was the software you used to identify or record the reaction time on eye tracking?
Thank you. Yes, so for eye tracking, we used the iLink machine. That's an iLink 1000. So it records at 1100 hertz. It's really high quality, and we have that in the lab at Leeds. And then to do the analysis, we used R for all the processing. So we just downloaded the raw data, and then we used R to run the stats and plot the graphs that I showed before. And then for reaction time, because we didn't have access to the lab, we usually would conduct studies in the lab, but it was during the pandemic. So we used PsychoPy, which is an open source program with Pavlovia to collect the reaction time measurements.
Great, ma'am. So PsychoPy as well as ePrime can also be used to collect data related to eye tracking and reaction time. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much. So our next speaker. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Loredo. So
thank you.
Stop
sharing.
Yeah. So now we are going to invite our next speaker. Let's have the pleasure of listening to the honorable and great speaker. I'm talking about Prof. Dr. Alan Mallet from UK. He's going to discuss about literature in the time of distraction. Prof. Mallet is a freelancer and independent researcher with more than 50 years of teaching experience in ELT at various renowned universities of the world. Prof. Mallet, please press on your talk. Let me check if Prof. Alan Mallet has joined us online or not. Yes, Prof. Mallet is here. Come on, please see. Yes, here. Prof. Mallet is very much here. So we all welcome you, Prof. Mallet, to the first International Riphah Conference on Language, Literature and Culture.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Prof.
Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you very much to all the organizers for inviting me. Now, I was to have some slides, I think. Now, where are they?
Okay, Prof, if you allow us, we can share your slide. Or you
shall I go on to share screen?
Okay, we are sharing your slide, Prof.
You are?
Yeah, now, Prof, you are allowed, you can share your slide.
So share. Okay, I don't see anything now.
Yeah, your screen is visible and you need to identify your slides, your PowerPoint slides. We can see your computer screen.
You can?
We can see your computer screen, sir.
Yes, but I can't see any slides. It says I'm, yeah.
So, let's see. Prof, you need to share your slide from your desktop, from your computer.
Yes, but I don't have them available here now. I send them to you, that's why.
Yeah, we already sent you. Okay, Prof, you just wait, we are sharing your slide. You would just read it and then explain from our slide. So we share our slide.
Are you going to put the slides up?
Yeah, we are going to upload the slide.
Okay, please do that then.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, and I don't see anywhere that I can move on. Are you going to move them for me?
Yes, sir. We are going to move for you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, sorry for the hiccup at the beginning, but anyway, I'm talking about literature in an age of distraction. Let me explain, first of all, what I mean by an age of distraction. Because it's my contention that we, can we move on to the first slide? Yeah, this one. Can you see the first slide?
Yes, sir.
Ah, okay. No, just the first slide, not the second slide. Can you go back? Yeah, okay. So when I'm talking about an age of distraction, I'm really rather concerned because it seems to me that we're living in an age where information is excessive. Now, it's interesting because in previous years, in previous ages, information was valuable because it was rare. Now information is overkill, basically, where I call it info glut. And this is all connected with things like the social media, for instance, compulsive use of social media. People are walking around holding a thing in front of their face. You can't pass them in the street without, moving them out of your way. People are constantly looking at little screens or even bigger screens. And I've put there are some acronyms. FOS means fear of silence. FOT means fear of thinking. And FOBA means fear of, sorry. Okay, never mind. Ubiquitous narcissism as well, IIAM. It's all about me. The cult of the selfie, if you like. Advertising, we are deluged with advertising. You know, you can't turn on your computer without getting a flood of advertisements. Ubiquitous entertainment and trivial entertainment, most of it. Wall-to-wall news. You can't turn on the radio without, or the television without getting news at some point pretty soon. And news from a variety of sources as well. Noise. We are constantly surrounded by noise. People find it very difficult to find silence. In fact, they avoid silence. And peer pressure, of course. FOMO, fear of missing out. Everybody is afraid that if they're not logging on the whole time, they're missing something which will affect their existence. Now, all of these things together actually mean that there's a kind of colonization of attention. People no longer have the facility, or they find it very difficult to concentrate on anything. So there's this kind of universal attention deficit. Now let's look at the next slide. Now, so my contention is that literature is rather different from this because it makes different kinds of demands on us. It demands concentrated attention, for one thing. It needs concentration, for example, on content and concentration on language, particularly on language. It invites limitation by the need to focus. In other words, it's about quality and not quantity. It's not this sheer, tsunami of stuff. It's something that comes at us, in a manageable size. It's not instant. It's not one shot. You don't get an adrenaline rush immediately as you do sometimes from your Instagram or your snapshot or your whatever. And it's non-trivial. Literature is not all about being serious, but it is never trivial. It's about something important. It always is. And it demands a personal response, both a cognitive response and an affective response. And it promotes understanding, I believe, of yourself and of other people. So, and thinking back to what I was saying about distraction, it also values silence. Literature, the power of the pause is very important in literature. And also comparison of what is not said in a text. Texts don't say everything. They say some things. They leave you to work out a lot. So for all these reasons, I think it's worth giving some attention to literature. Can we have the next slide, please? I will make this quite short because you all know this. Arguments that are made for literature, linguistic arguments, the fact that literary texts offer us a great richness of language, cultural arguments that exposure to literature leads to perhaps at least better knowledge, maybe not better understanding, but hopefully that too, and personal growth arguments, which I think are compelling, that literature does in fact help us to understand better who we are and who other people are. It makes us understand what life is like better, I believe. But on top of this, I think there are also pedagogical and educational arguments for literature, using literature in education in general, actually, as well as just language. Motivation, engagement, the way that students can be helped to engage with these texts in a very active way, and the fact that such texts are memorable, which is important, of course, in language learning. So for all these reasons, people have put these arguments forward for literature. Can I have the next slide, please? These are the major arguments for using literature. In the past, literature as study has been the major kind of paradigm, I suppose, and it still is in many, many places. When you talk about literature, people think, set books. Now we are going to study the set books or the set texts. We're going to study them. We're not going to, it doesn't matter all that much, whether we enjoy them or anything. The main thing is that we should study them and know about them and know about the authors and know about the history and know what we should believe about these texts and how we should understand them. So that is teaching about literature. That's one way of doing it. A second way is treating literature as a resource. And by a resource, I mean using literary texts as kind of exemplars of language, so that we can have spin-off from the text in terms of language. And I would call that teaching with literature. But the one that I'm going to focus on is what I call literature as appropriation, learning through literature. And learning through literature is in a way trying to help students to enter into the text, to see the text as it were from the inside. So it's literature from the inside out, rather than literature as study, which is literature from the inside, from the outside in. So where the student actually lives in the text to a degree. We can also, of course, relate this to extending the range of texts that we use, and not just canonical British or American texts, but texts which come from the wider world, from Pakistan, from India, from Singapore, from Malaysia, from wherever, Africa. There is such a rich variety of material available now that it would be a crime almost not to use this wide range of material. We can extend the range by moving into other genres as well, and we can use student-made literature, and I want to say something more about that later on. Can we have the next slide, please? So these are some questions when we're looking at literature as appropriation. Why do we expect students to understand everything in a text? This is a kind of teacher disease, I think. Teachers and learners, to some extent, they want to understand every word, everything in the text. Why? Why understand everything? You can understand something, that's good. And you can understand something different from what somebody else understands. That's even better, because texts are open to many interpretations. So why do we always use comprehension questions to prove that people have understood a text, when there are so many other ways that you can do it that I'll talk about in a moment? And why tell people about texts when they can find these things out for themselves by discovery? And finally, why kill texts by solemnizing them? Literary texts are not religious texts. They're not holy writ. Shakespeare didn't write his plays in order to be studied. There was no such thing anyway. Poets don't write their poems so that they can get onto school syllabuses or university syllabuses. So why solemnize these texts? You can play with texts. Texts are wonderful things to play with. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Could we just move on to the next text, please? The next slide. Yeah. Kenneth Koch is a wonderful, I think he may be dead actually, teacher in the States. And he wrote a wonderful book called Rose, How Did You Get That Read? And he talks about working with mainly immigrant and low social class students in New York, very rough. And he wasn't put off. He said, I'm going to teach poems, and I'm going to teach poems as poems. So he said, I wasn't put off by some of the difficulties that teachers are often bothered by. Unfamiliar words and difficult syntax, for example, and allusions to unfamiliar things. I wasn't put off either by passages in a poem that I knew would remain obscure to them. To reject every poem the children would not understand in all its detail would mean eliminating too many good things. Okay, next slide, please. And he talks about the criteria here. The criteria he believes for choosing poems to teach children are mistaken. Total understandability, which stunts children's poetic education by giving them nothing to understand that they haven't already understood. Childlikeness of theme and treatment, which condescends to their feelings and to their intelligence. And familiarity, which obliges them to go on reading the same inappropriate poems that their parents and grandparents had to read. And I think we all can resonate with that. So what matters for the present, this is quoting from him again, what matters for the present is not that the children admire Blake and his achievement, but that each child be able to find a tiger of his own. You remember the poem, Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. Okay, next poem, and the next slide, please. So now I'm coming on to the important part of my talk. What I've been talking about so far is generalities. If we want to engage students cognitively and effectively with text, how can we do it? Well, there are many, many ways, of course. And here are 5 ways that I'm going to discuss. Familiarization, extensive reading, that's including graded readers, performance, creative writing, and making strange. So let's move on to the first of these, which is familiarization. We have that slide, please. Yeah. We can make students aware that literature is all around us. It's not just in poems. It's not just in novels. It's not just in literature with a big L, in a capital L. It's all around us. You can find it in advertisements. You can find it in notices in the street. You can find it in what you overhear on the bus. You can hear it all over the place, in proverbs, in newspaper headlines, and so on. Here are a couple of examples. Bye bye baby. Bye bye baby. B-Y-B-U-Y. Bye bye baby. And bye bye baby. So obviously there's a pun there. Tower of Pizza. Tower of Pizza is an advertisement for pizza, but the play on words with the Tower of Pisa in Italy. These are literary devices. Twice Upon a Time. This is an advertisement again, playing on the Once Upon a Time thing. Weapons of mass distraction. This is based on weapons of mass destruction, you will remember from the Iraq War. So there are these things all around us, and it's worth with students exploring some of these examples of literature in life. You can also do a certain number of things, routines to excuse me, routines to incorporate literature. For example, every time you come into the class, you either tell a very short story, you read a short poem, or you give a quotation, or you do something which sets the students up for listening to literature. So, for example, you might tell us a short joke at the beginning of your class, like this one. A rich lady was sitting in a restaurant having dinner. As she began to eat her soup, she noticed a large fly in it. So she called the waiter over and said to the waiter, "Waiter, what is this fly doing in my soup?" So the waiter looked very carefully at the soup for a few minutes, and then he said, "Madam, I think it is drowning." Now, you know, okay, it's not that funny, but it's a way of starting to warm people up for that kind of playfulness which we find in literature. And you could follow that up in another class with a poem like a limerick, for example, which is on a similar theme about restaurants and things in soup. A gentleman dining at Crewe found a large mouse in his stew. Said the waiter, "Don't shout and wave it about, or the rest will be wanting one too." So you can do this kind of thing, which kind of whets the appetite, in other words. You can read an extended text aloud in episodes, so a short bit every time. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to read from a novel. It's a graded reader. It's called I Am a Slave. I Am a Slave. It's about modern slavery, this book. Chapter 1. It hurts. It hurts. I hurt. It hurts me. It hurts me a lot. It hurts me when I sit down. It hurts me when I stand up. It hurts me when I lie down to sleep at night. It hurts when I get up in the morning. It never stops. It never stops hurting me. When I wake in the night, I feel it. It's always there, this red-hot pain up inside me. It hurts me even more when I go to the bathroom, like a hot fire coming out of me. And when I wash, the pain stings me like a wasp. All day it hurts me, and all night. When will it stop? Maybe it will never stop. Maybe I will always have this pain. When I think of that, I want to die. And when I think of what he did to me, I want to die anyway. This is what he did to me. I can never forget that. I can never stop thinking of that terrible thing he did to me and the pain. I will never forget. I hate him. I hate them all. I can never forgive him. Chapter 2. My first good dream. Some nights I'm lucky because I have one of my good dreams. In this dream, I'm happy. I'm sitting by the river near our village. I'm sitting in the shade of a big tree. The sun is shining brightly, and our buffaloes are in the river to keep cool. My little sister Lila is playing with some stones. She's building a toy house. Everything is so peaceful. Then on the other side of the river, I see my mother. She is coming back from the market in the town. On her head, she is carrying a big basket full of the things she has bought in the market. I wave to her, and she waves back. The water is not deep in the river. I walk into the river and go to meet my mother. She is coming back from the market in the town. Sorry, the water is not deep in the river. I walk into the river and go to meet my mother. The water is cool for my feet. She holds out her hand to me. We are both smiling at each other. Then as we meet, I feel her warm hand. I feel all the love she gives me in her warm hand. Then I wake. I'm alone. I'm far from home. Where is she now? Chapter 3. My name is Aisha. My name is Aisha. I'm 14 years old. I live in London. I'm a slave. How do I know that? Well, I work every day. Sometimes I work for 14 hours a day. but they do not pay me. How do I know? Well, I cannot leave this house. They locked all the doors, and I do not have a key. If I go out, they go with me, and I have no papers, no passport, no work permit, nothing. So I cannot run away. I am a prisoner. They always tell me, if you run away, the police will catch you. They will put you in prison. How do I know that? Well, I sleep on the floor of the room where the washing machine is. I sleep on a mat on the floor with an old blanket to cover me. I have to wash there too. I'm not allowed to use their bathrooms, and I cannot use the washing machine for my clothes. I have to wash them in the house. How do I know that? Well, all I get to eat is what they leave. Sometimes there's some rice or bread. Sometimes there's a bit of fish or some chicken bones. Sometimes there are some cold vegetables. I drink water from the tap. If I'm not a slave, then what am I? My name is Aisha. I'm a slave. This is my story. So I would start with that, and then we would move on as we go along. Reading an extended text aloud in episodes. I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble with my screen here. That's why I'm hesitating. Book displays. Bring in books that are interesting for the kids to have a look at. And can we just go back to that other slide? Sorry. Yeah. Book displays. Poem of the week. Bring in a poem that you're going to read every day for a week, just a short one, and invite students to bring their poems in if they want to. Choose a favorite word or a phrase from a text that you give. It could be a text from a reader or from a novel, which has some striking pieces in it, and the students then decide which are their favorite words or which are their favorite phrases for that. Incorporate storytelling in classes. That's another way of familiarizing people with the idea of plot and character and dialogue and so on, which comes out very strongly in stories. Or incorporate DVDs of authors reading their own work, for example. Here's an example of 30 poets on DVD, all reading their own work, which can be very, very stimulating too. So now we can move to the next slide, please. So extensive reading. Extensive reading, I believe you are familiar with this, is reading texts which are not too difficult, not too easy, just at the right level for students. They read them on their own. They read them at their own pace. They don't have to answer lots of questions, and they choose what to read. These are the kinds of things which extensive reading is characterized by. So this language learner literature, which is basically literature written with this audience in mind, with language learners in mind, is a flourishing new genre. There are plenty of examples of this. I just read you an extract from I Am a Slave. That is at level 2. And level 2 is, you may have noticed when I was reading, no difficult vocabulary, lots and lots of repetition, but nonetheless, there's something engaging about the story, or we hope there is. If you want a really good example of this, there's Jojo's Story by Antoinette Moses in the Cambridge University Readers Series, which is an excellent book about the civil war in Bosnia, written in very simple language, but terribly, terribly moving and compelling. So I would encourage extensive reading and get that as part of everything that we do. If I can just share a memory from my own education, such as it was. When I was in primary school, I had a wonderful teacher. This was during the Second World War, by the way, not the First World War. It was her practice to have a cupboard in the corner of the room, which was full of books, all sorts of books, all sorts of books. And she would just say, okay, take a book, take it home. When you finish, bring it back. No questions, no exercises, nothing like that. Just read the book, enjoy it, bring it back. And that has really colored my own reading habits for a lifetime. You know, I was 7 years old at the time. And it gets the students into the reading habit. And that, I think, is the important thing. Okay, let's move on then to performance. But by performance can be at various levels. We can ask students, for example, to read a text aloud, a prepared text, which they then interpret as dramatically as they can. That's an individual thing. Okay. What I prefer is actually group performances of texts, quite simple texts. They don't have to be very long. In fact, they're better if they're not too long. And then the students have to read the text together, obviously, and prepare and decide who is going to speak which part of the text, how they're going to speak it, how they're going to have the maximum effect on their audience when they read this text. Now, the advantages of this, from my point of view, are that it offers a secure framework because they don't have to think about what they're going to say. They have the text to guide them. It leads to subconscious acquisition because they are constantly painlessly repeating the text as they rehearse it. Again, if I can share a reminiscence, I had a teacher of French many, many years ago who used to come into the class and play us the latest popular songs in French. And we would sing along, we would read them and listen. I can still remember some of those texts now, 70 years later, and they are really fixed in my mind. So this subconscious acquisition of text, when you are performing them, it leads to a lot of discussion. Who's going to do what? Why are you doing it that way? Why don't you do this? Wouldn't it be better if we did that? It leads to natural memorization, as I just said. It integrates the physical. And I think this is very important because language is not just an intellectual business. It's a physical business. When we speak, we use our whole body. We don't just use our mouth. You know, there's a lot of physicality about language, and performing a text allows us to exploit that. And it helps us get under the skin of the text, because when you perform the text, you somehow inhabit it. You live in it in a way that you wouldn't if you simply read it from the outside. So I'm suggesting then that performing text would be another way of getting literature into the classroom in an effective way. Could I have the next one, please? Okay, creative writing. I am a devotee of creative writing, and I have to admit that. I've been running a group in Asia for the last 20-odd years, encouraging teachers to write creatively. Now, sometimes people get a bit hung up about this, but here are some of the things that I think it does, creative writing. It helps in language acquisition, especially vocabulary, and especially the sense of rhythm. When you're writing a poem or writing a story, you start to inhabit the rhythm of the language. It develops discipline and creativity. Now, that might seem like a paradox, but discipline is really very necessary in writing, creative writing, because it gives you a framework to work within. So it's both a constraint and a support and a stimulus. It allows for personalization. In fact, it demands personalization. You don't write as somebody else, you're writing as yourself. It can be relevant because you write about things that are important to you. And it leads to enormous self-esteem and motivation. But most of all, it does give us insider understanding of what makes a text tick. When you have written something yourself, it helps you to understand better other people's texts, because you see, you've been through that process yourself. And I think that is very, very important. I'm going to give you one or two examples for creative writing. This is a book. I don't know if you can see it very well. This was a book that came out of a workshop that I ran in Hyderabad in India just about 2 years ago now, just before the pandemic. And every time we run one of these events, we publish the results, because that's an enormous boost to self-esteem and motivation. When you see your work in print, my goodness, that's me. I wrote that. Wonderful. Nothing like it for motivation. So I'll just give you a few of the sorts of things that we wrote in this particular thing. Haikus. Here's a haiku. You know what a haiku is? 17 syllables, 5 and 5, Japanese form. We were inviting each of the people to write a number of haikus. Here's one of them. Inside the temple, I meditate to find peace. Someone steals my shoes. Inside the temple, I meditate to find peace. Someone steals my shoes. That's quite a witty one, and you find that all sorts of creativity comes out from this. Poems based on a picture. Take an art picture, and then people write a poem about that picture. Here's a poem about a picture, about a picture of a man on a treadwheel, going round and round on a treadwheel. My shadow speaks to me. I'm not the main event. I'm definitely not the one to look at. Notice how entangled I am. Notice how freely my shadow moves. I run in circles, and circles run me, all suited up. I neatly observe my calamity. So working from pictures, describing an insect. Insects, using a stem poem. A stem poem is where you start every line in exactly the same way. So you give them the first line, and then they can go on finding new lines. So for example, sleep. Sleep is a blessing. Sleep is a blessing to the new mother. Sleep is the romance between the pillow and me. Sleep is when life regenerates. It is when my phone recharges. It is when my towel dries. Sleep is forgetting my heartaches. Sleep is my life as it should be. Sleep is my sacred freedom. Sleep is all I need right now. You can write recipe poems. There were recipes, all sorts of recipes came up, but not recipes for food, recipes for other things. So here is a tonic for life. This is a recipe for life. Take a spoonful of courage, an ounce of confidence, 2 cups of determination, 1 cube of optimism, mixed well. Take this potion every morning to beat the trials and tribulations of everyday life. So you can see that there are, in fact, many, many ways of writing creatively, which are not so demanding that they cannot be done. Now, here is a book, which is an anthology of some of the work that has been done in creative writing by teachers, all of them from Asia. This is an Asia writing group. So there's that title. And if anybody would like a copy of this, all they have to do is to send me an email. My address is at the end of the slideshow, and I will send you an electronic copy of that book. And then you can read for yourself some of the more interesting things that can be done. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, making strange. By this I mean playing around with texts. I said before that we shouldn't be solemnizing texts, that they're there to be played around with. One of the things that I do is ask students to read texts with variations. So using volume, emphasis, and speech style, changing all of those in a text. So here is an example of a very short text, and I get the students to work on this in a group of about usually 5. Or it can be done in pairs, alternating from one sentence to the next. So just listen to the text, and each of the sentences is read in a different way. He never sent me flowers. He never wrote me letters. He never took me to restaurants. He never spoke of love. We met in parks. I don't remember what he said, but I remember how he said it. Most of it was silence. Anyway, so you can play around with text like that in pairs or in groups. A second way is to look at taking a long poem, a longish poem. For example, Wordsworth's The Daffodils. I think everybody knows that poem. It's been done to death over the years in classrooms and all over the world. I don't think it's a particularly good poem, actually, but it is very, very popular and well known. So I give out the poem. There are, I think, 25 lines in the poem. And I asked the students to reduce that to just 12. So they have to select lines from the poem which will fit together and form a new poem, much shorter than the old one. And when they've got a poem of 12 lines, I ask them to reduce it again to 8 lines. And when they've got it down to 8 lines, I ask them to write a haiku. So the same long poem, we're playing around with it, we're shortening it by taking out sentences, we're gradually whittling it down to the real essence of what it means. And that can be a very a very rewarding activity too. Dictacomp. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. Dictacomp is a form of dictation, but it's not the traditional form of dictation. When you do a dictacomp, you read a text aloud at normal speed. You read it once, the students don't write anything. You read it a second time, still at normal speed. They write down any words that they catch, as many as they can. And then they work in groups to share what they've written down. And then you read it a third time, also at normal speed. And they again try to fill in the gaps. And usually by the time you've read the poem 5 times, they have it. And they have it, but they have it in a much more active way than they would if you did it as a normal dictation. You know, you read a phrase, stop, read it again, stop, and so on. This is asking them to, you know, apprehend the poem as well as comprehend the poem. So that would be another way of playing around. The second, the next kind of activity that you can do is offering a text which is made up of 2 texts which are spliced together. And the student's task then is to unsplice them back into 2 texts again. This is quite a demanding activity, but again, it means that there is a lot of deep processing going on. It's not just something where you answer a comprehension question. A final idea, I mean, there are lots more ideas, is to match a piece of dialogue with a character. What kind of a character would say this? So you have a number of texts, short texts, and then you have a number of character descriptions. And you say, which character would have said this? Which character would have said that? And again, it means that a lot of deep processing has to be going on for that to happen. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I've looked then at these various approaches. Familiarization. Can you go back to the previous text, please? Slide, not this one. Yeah, that's the one. Familiarization, extensive reading, performance, creative writing, and making strange. Well, as I didn't promise you a rose garden at the beginning of the talk, and as you will have understood, I am not a scholar, I'm a practitioner. And I don't need to apologize for that, I don't think. What I've been suggesting is that we need things that will combat the ubiquitous spread of distraction in our societies. If I could just come back to that for a moment. One of the reasons that we are not able to manage the world, and by that I mean the climate crisis, for instance, is that people are so totally distracted that they are unable to focus for long enough on that. I seem to have some competition. Is that, or can you hear that? I can hear it. So are there other people on the line?
Yes, Prof, we can listen to and we are very attentive.
No, sorry. Okay, I'm not quite finished yet. So yeah, give me another 5 minutes and then stop. Yeah, okay. So I'm very focused on this. There is a great deal of concern, both among academics and other people, about this distraction, total distraction. Here's a book, another book. I'm sorry, I keep on flashing. Stand Out of My Light, Stand Out of Our Light by Williams. And it's about how much our society is being distracted. We are, in the words of Neil Postman, who wrote a wonderful book years and years ago about television, we are amusing ourselves to death. Amusing ourselves to death, if we're not careful. So we need to find this, points of where we can pay attention to things and where we can really engage deeply with things, not simply superficially in the way that we so often do. I'm as guilty of this as everybody else. When this is over, what will I do? I will go back to my computer and I will check my email, because I have this compulsion that everybody else has, that they want to know if something is happening that they ought to know about. But of course, it doesn't matter. Couldn't matter less, usually. I get hundreds of emails every day, and maybe one of them is worth reading. So, I'm very, very, I would like to leave that message with you, that literature is one way of combating this scourge, actually, of distraction. And I want to suggest that very strongly. It's not the only way, of course. Music is another way, meditation is another way. There are plenty of other ways of doing it, but literature in the classroom is one way. Now, there are significant challenges, obviously, because we need to try and take back control over our time and our thought and all this deluge of stuff that's coming back over us. We need to combat short-term utilitarian thinking values. Everything has to be done quickly. There's a wonderful book by Gleich called Faster, The Acceleration of Virtually Everything. If you think of your life, it's 24/7 now for many people. They don't get a chance to recuperate, to allow for thought. So that's a really big challenge. We also need to restore respect to other languages. And I know that's one of the sub-themes of this conference. I'm always concerned that the way that English has become world language, if you like, anyway, it has become very, very prevalent worldwide, that has done damage to many other languages. And of course, languages, there is not a better language and not so good language. All languages are equally valid in their own right. And all languages have literatures, even if they're oral literatures. And restoring respect for this, I think, is an important part of this, sorting things out. I try to practice what I preach. So I use five or six languages myself, and I try and keep them going, because it's very important for me to know how other languages divide up the world and look at the world. It gives you a different perspective on everything. And then the last thing here is, I think that we need to bridge the gap between English in the classroom and the reality of English use outside the classroom. Very often we kind of separate off English in the classroom in a way which I think is not helpful. Because why are you learning English at all? Well, it's because you want to learn it, you want to use it afterwards. So we have to find ways of making what we do in the classroom more relevant to what people are going to do later on. Literature is one way of meeting that challenge and the other challenges. So could I have the last slide, please? Okay. Here are just some quotes, which I think say a lot about literature. By logic and reason we die hourly. By imagination we live. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. I think this is very true. Excuse me. I do apologize. I'm sorry. I hadn't turned my phone off. You can find poetry in your everyday life, your memory, in what people say on the bus, or just what's in your heart. Carol Ann Duffy is the poet laureate in Britain at the moment. Reason can answer questions, but imagination has to ask them. So I like some of these quotes. And these are the kind of quotes which actually, by the way, I would use at the beginning of a class as part of the familiarization process that I mentioned earlier. Now, if we could just have the very last slide, please. Could we do that? Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you want a copy of that book, that's the address. yellowmoo@yahoo.co.uk. That's my personal email address, and you are welcome to write to me and ask for a copy if you would like one. The second address is the Creativity Group. You might like to check that out. It's a group of people worldwide who are interested in more creative ways of teaching. And there are a couple of hundred people worldwide involved in that group. You can join it if you like. And the last address there, the last link, is to the Aisha Teacher Writer Group. This is, I think, still live, but it's not being added to. But it still has a lot of interesting stuff on creative writing. So thank you once again for staying with me and listening, perhaps listening. And thank you to the organizers again for inviting me. And I wish you a good end of conference and a good life afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riphah, for sharing wonderful ideas on literature and how we can incorporate literature for learning, creative writing, and different sort of activities for teaching and learning second language. Thank you very much, Riphah, once again. So, any question from the house? Yeah, Riphah, we have one question for you. So, one of our colleagues, Dr. Shahid Mutaz, is going to ask you one question.
इधर से डॉक्टर साहब इधर से
Hello.
Hello.
Well, Doctor, my question is, there are many texts within a text. Which one is more authentic and real? What is your opinion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question, please?
Dear Doctor, Dr. Shahid wants to ask you, there are many texts within text. So which text can be considered as most authentic text?
Well, I'm not sure that I understand the question, but I mean, obviously many texts, yes, do contain other texts. But as to, which text is more important, I really don't know. I don't make any pretension to know that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you think that the text talk to us?
Do I think?
Do you think that the text talks to us?
Talks to us? Well, some texts do. Many texts do. But what we hear is different. I think one of the tests of a really good literary text is that it is open to multiple interpretations, and people will find in it what they are looking for very often. And this is one of the values, of course, of using literary texts in education, in classes, because Different people will have different opinions, and they can defend those opinions. Their understandings are different. The other thing about literary texts, I mean, those of value, I think, are that whenever you come back to a literary text of value, you find something new in it. And this is why, for example, I mean, it's a trite example, but why Shakespeare's sonnets are still read. Every time I go back to a Shakespeare sonnet, I find something new in it. It's incredible. And when you come back to a great poem or a great novel, you find new things every time you read it. And I think that's one of the touchstones, actually, for selecting a really important or good text. But of course, many texts are not profound. They don't have to be profound. You know, they don't have to be profound. They can be frivolous, but not trivial.
Yeah. Thank you, my dear Prof. Thank you very much. It was wonderful having you over here. So goodbye from our side.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. And before we start our next session, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Shahid Siddiqui, who has just arrived, and we are very much thankful to Dr. Shahid Siddiqui for gracing this occasion. So please welcome Dr. Shahid Siddiqui sir. So our next speaker is our next topic for this session is Socio-Phonetics of Pakistani ESL Classroom, Bridging Research and Teaching. And for that, it will be my honor to invite Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Kamal Khan from Allama Iqbal Open University, Islamabad, to come on the stage and present his talk. So please, Dr. Kamal Khan, please come forward. So over to Dr. Kamal Khan. We lovely call him as Dr. KK.
Session. Slides of मैडम को फॉरवर्ड में कैमरा वाज क्लोज कर अच्छा अच्छा ये सनस्क्रीन क्षेत्र आपने सर नहीं सर आपने भेज दिया बस ठीक है चलिए यहाँ पे नेक्स्ट ठीक है हाँ अब नोट से तो यही है ना इधर से किया ना PDF हाँ ठीक है ऊपर पर बस सबसे करने में कोई मसला है उसको कोई बात नहीं ये
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon. I'm just starting with my humble thanks to the organizing committee, Dr. Islam and his team, for this wonderful platform. And it's also my personal gratitude because Lahore is my second home. And I'm always pleased to be here with my students and with my colleagues, my friends and teachers. Okay, my topic for this talk is Socio-Phonetics of Pakistani ESL Classroom, Bridging Research and Teaching. I hope you all have the idea of Socio-Phonetics. Basically, when I use this phrase in this talk, I mean this is as a methodology. When we'll explore the phonetics of Pakistani ESL learners and also ESL speakers. And then I would relate whatever I'm proposing in my talk with something which we can ultimately bring into Pakistani ESL classroom as pronunciation pedagogy. So the point is that we are not really conducting good research, particularly in the area of pronunciation teaching or pronunciation learning. And what I'm proposing here is basically, recognition of Pakistani English. And I hope everybody knows here that what is the term World English is. And there is a big place for Pakistani English to be recognized and also to be evaluated and described. So what I'm actually supposing here is that you all know these basic key technical terms, socio-phonetics and pronunciation pedagogy. Right. Let me just give you some basic ideas about pronunciation pedagogy. In the last 50 years, the ESL classroom has seen a lot of transformation. And this transformation is in so many technical terms, like we have seen the L2 experimental phonology and a lot of scientific work going on, experimentations which are not only conducted inside the lab and also outside the lab. And classroom being, one of the robust lab is the point of focus for researchers and for English language teachers. So I would relate that with Pakistani ESL classroom, and this is what is going on at international platforms. But unfortunately, we don't really have any good data where we can explore Pakistani English and the technical, the robust features of Pakistani socio-phonetics, right? Like we don't really have that. What's the profile of Pakistani English? So that's the point where I would like to suggest some changes. And we all know that with the last 50 years, innovative ways been explored by experts because the scholarships in pronunciation pedagogy is based on evidence-based scholarships. I think there is something else going on. Anyhow, so, pronunciation pedagogy is based on evidence-based scholarships. And honestly speaking, we don't really have evidence-based scholarship in Pakistani English, right? Similarly, we are not really conducting research within our own classroom. Whatever we pick up in the form of textbook, we are sharing that with our students. We are copying that, and we might be conducting some interesting activities in the classroom, but we are not really coming up with evidence-based research, and we don't have this evidence-based experimentation, particularly in Pakistani classroom. So my talk is basically based on pronunciation, which is the core feature of Pakistani English, but I would like to go beyond only those phonetic features. I would like to highlight that how the phonetic features of Pakistani learners and speakers both, how could they be further exploited for robust research in Pakistan? And how could we come up with something which is more practical, which is more effective, and which could give us something which could be called the evidence-based research, right? So that's the idea. And I would be recommending some points, particularly to the students. Since you are active researchers, you'll have some ideas that how could you come up and take up some of these features. I know that this is a huge project, what I'm actually proposing. And this is my ongoing project. 3 of my PhD scholars are working on it. We have so far selected 3 areas where we are focusing now. And we have collected data from 3 linguistic, communities, sub-communities of Pakistani English. Right. Socio-phonetics is basically an interface of sociolinguistics and phonetics. Just for the sake of your recap, and for those who don't really know socio-phonetics, it's highly empirical, and like sociolinguistics as well as phonetics, it is based on empirical data. And socio-phonetics really favors the bottom-up approach. Like we're starting with the specific data, and from specific we go to the general data. So that's the bottom approach which is used in socio-phonetics. I hope you all know, and you must have known to William Labov, his Variationist Paradigm, which was the start of quantitative sociolinguistics, if you have heard this phrase. He actually conducted his thesis in 1963 in Martha's vineyard when he was exploring 2 diphthongs, ow and I, like in mouse and mice. And he was exploring, the speech of Americans on the island, Martha's vineyard. So that was one way or the other. That was the start of socio-phonetics, right? And although we particularly came to know about the term socio-phonetics in 1974, when there was a suggestion based on the juxtaposition of 2 things, sociolinguistics and phonetics, right? That was for the first time used in 1974. But we already had an idea about sociolinguistic research, started with William Labov. And then for the next 2-3 decades, William Labov and his students, they were engaged in doing such kind of activities. And I hope you have seen the whole story. In 90s, socio-phonetics was considered as one of the most widely used area for research. And 2000 onward, it's been really taken up as one of the most frequently visited area in applied linguistics and also in theoretical linguistics. Right. So in this area, basically the empirical methods are used, and I'm actually relating this with L2 phonology, right? Like Labov was looking for variation in speech, variation in pronunciation, and he was, theoretically proving that while speech starts with, indicators, going through markers, and ultimately reaching stereotypes, the stage of stereotypes. And this is which I actually questioned from the lady earlier, from the doctor, that we cannot really get rid of our phonetic repertoire. That is supposed to be with us for quite a long time. And that's also the starting point of world Englishes. Otherwise, there is no space for more Englishes. We would have only one English, right? So we can connect this, and of course, it's been connected by experts, that L2 phonology research is also to be carried out using computer, using softwares, and to explore and relate and then implement whatever we come up with in our curriculum and teach English effectively. So that's been very much the part of the fashion these days, and we would like to suggest something on those lines. Right. Socio-phonetics is basically a crossroad of variation and its effects. I hope by now it's clear to you all that like sociolinguistics was the start of the quantitative research and the quantitative sociolinguistics, that how your speech is the marker of something else. Indexicality, basically, in linguistics, indexicality, right? And this is basically about, the socio-phonetics is basically about your pronunciation when you are coming up with something at your background, not only your geographical background, but also your L1 background and your educational background. So your speech is basically your identity of so many things at a time. So when we'll use this kind of methodology in SLA pronunciation, we would not only see that what difficulties are there to be mastered by the learners, And how is the non-native variety different than the native variety of English, right? And researchers have already started exploring that how is speech perception influenced by your phonetic repertoire. It's not simply the identification of whatever you are listening to. Speech perception is something which is based on your background, physiological, as well as your L1 knowledge. And whatever you listen to is in the form of your knowledge, which is there, so speech perception, and then phonological categorization. So phonological categorization is something which is like your phonetic repertoire is basically showing you, and you are making one more category of the same phone, which is already part of the English inventory, English phonological inventory, but you are pronouncing it differently because you are not the native speaker of English. So you are actually creating a new category of the sound. And that new category is the reflection of your identity as somebody else. You are not from the core part of, if you just use Petru's, stratification of Englishes, right? So your non-native properties are there. And then your speech identification is done in Socio-Phonetics. And on the basis of your speech identification, and particularly when you are a non-native speaker, you accommodate your pronunciation to the target area. So like wherever you go, you take your properties alongside you, and you are trying consciously or unconsciously to accommodate your speech. So these are the points which are considered in Socio-Phonetics. And the central question of L2 phonology is that how does the phonological system of L2 learners look like? Like one of the big questions is, right? So like you can just intensively see that how is the speech different? How is it acquired? What processes are involved? What are the comfortable places and what are difficult areas where the L2 learners are required to work more and where they would be comfortable? So these are some of the points. When we talk about the socio-phonetics of Pakistani ESL classroom, we are required to see with a lot of evidence-based scholarship that what properties are there in Pakistani multilingual speakers. So the multilingual practices are always reflected in Pakistani English, right? But we haven't seen any empirical evidences so far. So we need to address them with the help of computer, of course. And then the bilingual contexts are supposed to be considered for profiling the socio-phonetics of Pakistani English. We haven't yet developed the profile of Indo-Aryan languages, particularly in connection to Pakistani English. We don't know that when Pakistani learners, like we can guess some rough points that, okay, like Pakistani speakers might face some issues when they would acquire consonant clusters, or they might face issues when they would work on some of the peculiar English sounds like je, for example. Like a Pakistani learner is going to call it mayer than measure, or player than pleasure, or some of those, dental sounds like the, interdental sound, the or the. These are some of the features which you can consider while talking about the bilingual contexts of Pakistani speakers, because they are coming up with a lot of background L1 phonetic repertoire. And we haven't seen through computer that what areas are supposed to be there and what phonetic roles could their first or second or third languages do, right? So we need to, address that. And research methods in L2 pronunciation research are basically have not been considered in Pakistani context. Our pronunciation pedagogy is not planned or is not really designed on the basis of something concrete. We are following whatever we have been given by the authorities. And this is something like the top-down policy, which is the core part of our education policy. Dr. Shah is there, he's an expert in education policy. Same is the case with our, teaching of pronunciation. And we don't really have anything which is based on micro-analytic methods. Like the bottom-up approach is missing there. So we need to address that. And we are required to monitor speaking and listening inside the classroom is a lab, and also outside the classroom. I'm sharing my data, which is a recently conducted research. 3 of our PhD scholars, they have done their work, and it was the starting point. Just we would like to include other languages. As I said, that it's a huge project. We cannot really finish developing the Socio-Phonetics of Pakistani English within one research project. Hundreds of people are required to do that, but we are starting, and I'm just sharing my startup with you all. Would you believe that these vowels, which are there for like bath, when we collected the data, right? So the first vowel was pronounced accurately, but you can think about the second one. When it was pronounced O by 21%, and A by 17%, and by 62%. Right? And similarly, palm, start, face. So you see, face and face, the differences. And you can see through computer that what's the length of the sound, length, duration, and also the place of production, the place of articulation. Similarly, goat, goat, God. So three variations for the last vowel sound. And this was impressionistic part. It's not scientific data. So we were doing the traditional phonetics and phonology for this. Right. Next, we selected 3 languages, Punjabi, Saraiki, and Pashto, and only 2 speakers from each community. So it's not the large enough data. And we, based on Yavas 2011, we just compared languages in the form of structural patterns. And like it was a mini contrastive analysis. So you can see that the square brackets were showing that these sounds were there in L1, but these were based on allophonic variation. So the variation was not phonemic, but it was allophonic. Then the dotted rounded, the circles, they were showing that the sounds exist there, but allophonic, and those were optional. And the solid circles, they were missing in the target phoneme. So this was the idea that we conducted a mini contrastive analysis. And for vowels, we actually witnessed that all of those communities were not really pronouncing vowels with phonemic variation. They were mixing E with A with A, and A with and O with O. And you can imagine, because we all have our L1s different. Like some of us might have Punjabi, others Pashto and Urdu. And all this affect our acquisition of English as L2. But we haven't considered this for research so far. We don't have enough data to claim something on the basis of this. 3 data groups, short vowels, and you can see even across these 3 groups, all 3 groups were differently pronouncing short vowels, long vowels, and diphthongs. Even those diphthongs for group 3 were only 2 long vowels. Now this is going to affect our pronunciation of English, and we need to work on it, right? And these were for the data, different stimuli list. And in some cases, like for fleece, you can see the difference in length duration. For some of those stimuli words, they were pronouncing similarly, but not identically. And since it was impressionistic data, we cannot really claim on the basis of any accuracy or authenticity. We need to see it scientifically, right? So this was only the traditional method. Now we are proposing that we can go for Pratt and scientific data. This was again the list which we used. It is just for your understanding that these were the sounds. You can have a look, and then we can go to the scientific data. Experimental part. Considering the huge work involved, my colleagues who are expert of plant and scientific data analysis, they would agree with me that we cannot really analyze this kind of data in days. We need to work in months, and maybe sometimes in years. It might take years to analyze this kind of data, particularly when you are considering segments, not even words, segments. But this is how we have started it. And on the basis of all this impressionistic as well as scientific experimental data, we would answer these kinds of questions. What's the real inventory of Pakistani English? Vowel inventory? What vowels are there? And of course, Pakistani variety is a separate variety of English. What aspects of them reflect the specific variety of Pak English? What are those features which make Pakistani English is a separate variety of English? So we can address such questions in this. And we can also revisit something which were claimed by experts in past. Like you might remember some of those old researches when Pakistani English was declared as non-variety of English, or maybe incorrect variety of English. Do you remember something like that? I hope so. But Pakistani variety is an accurate variety of English, not really accurate, but it's one kind of variety of English. And it's not the product of imperfection. It's not the product of imperfection. It's the product of a separate variety, which is very natural. We have Chinese English, we have Australian English, we have Canadian English, we have Indian English, and we have Pakistani English. But Pakistani English, we don't really have a complete profile of Pakistani English. So we need to focus on that historically as well as linguistically. Historically, what changes are taking place? Historically, what languages are at the background of these specific features of English? So we need to explore them historically also and linguistically as well. Then about consonants, like what consonant clusters are possible and what's the local model of Pakistani pronunciation of English? We can address such kind of, issues and such kind of researches, of course. How are we different, or how are we differently speaking our own English? Like from RP or standard American English. So we can explore some comparisons also. We can compare. Then ideological alignment. Why and when we would pronounce a specific word in a very specific manner. So we need to address that also. The ideological aspect of Pakistani English. Like I gave you some examples. That why are we calling it measurement? Why not measurement? Or player? Why not pleasure? Right? So we can also explore such questions, and we can see that variability is there. So we have a variety which is different than others. And of course, apart from phonetics, we can also explore suprasegmental features. Why some diphthongs are quite long in Pakistani English and why are they short? So lengthening, stress, intonation, juncture, aspiration, whether it is there or not, and various kinds of assimilations. We can explore them. So these are some of the questions which we can. As I said, unfortunately, my data is not complete, but I will definitely share my final findings with you. Let's see how much time it takes. But as I said, that this is not a project to be done by a single individual. Of course, we need to involve people. We have so many language families in the country, and therefore we have different features in our Pakistani English. I'm recommending something for that. We must use experimental phonological researches. We can start with simple comparisons, compare vowels and their features, individual features, and segments, of course. We can compare values, F1 and F2, very simple values. But remember that F1 and F2 are not everything. We need to consider so many other things. right? Then structures and perceptual cues. We must have reference values. Like for American English, we have reference values that which vowel sound is approximately of how much length. For Pakistani vowels and consonants, we don't have these reference values. So we need to answer these questions. We must have reference values. I personally think that if we conduct researches from various parts of the country and we collect data from different communities, we would have differences in findings, but those differences would be meaningless once we'll have solid structural description of Pakistani English, right? Then we can also carry out comparisons across studies, like one study which I'm doing right now with my students. You can also plan such studies in Lahore, or somebody can do that in Peshawar and Karachi. So we need to do such studies and compare findings across studies, right? Then we can also main pronunciation pedagogy as the part of all this kind of research. Because the ultimate goal is to teach English pronunciation effectively. So that's the ultimate goal. So we can come up like with something like production practices which are effective across the country, and interlanguage phonology. Interlanguage phonology is like when we switch from one phonological grammar to another phonological grammar, what changes, what processes are to take place. So interlanguage phonology between Pakistani English and British English. Then we need to go for longitudinal studies as well, that how the pronunciation is now changing in Pakistan. And you can imagine that maybe 2-3 decades ago, people were preferring British accent. Now they are going towards American accent. And that is going to influence our own socio-phonetic repertoire, right? Then we can share findings. We can think about socio-phonetic changes which are taking place between generations and also area-wise. And then we can plan our lessons for our classroom based on the accurate evidence-based findings. And last but not the least, we can also explore our own research methodology. What I'm proposing is not the final word. You can come up with your own design, then we can compare, and we could go for something really authentic. Thank you all, and I can go to the Q&A session. Thank
you, my Dr. It was a really wonderful session. So question and answer session is open for the house. So please come forward.
Also, there is one comment, one question to my side. I've been teaching this word English for the last 2-3 semesters to the PhD students. It's very informative lecture for me as well, because we have taken word English from phonological perspective, from morphological, from syntactic perspective, but not from this social-phonetic perspective of parting English. That's very informative. I'll add in my next lecture.
Thank you so much.
So there is a question, is there any difference between variation and error? What criteria we can determine to bifurcate them?
Yeah, very simple. If it is personal act, it's an error, which is not accepted by others. If you are speaking in a way which is accepted by all people in this hall, though it's a very small community, then it's not an error, even if you are speaking with an error, right? Station is station. It is not is station. But if we all know that it is station, then it's not an error, because that's the question of acceptability. So if it's an individual act, it's an error or a mistake. It could be a mistake also. Not technically going into the difference between mistake and error. But if people have some acceptability for it, even it's not similar to the international standard of English, it is still not an error, right? Yeah.
Dr. Mohammed is from Punjab University. you would appreciate this comprehension chart, Socio-Phonetics. So we have been talking about the relationship between social variables and pronunciation. But you have invited our attention to a new dimension. It is relating pronunciation with linguistic diversity. So this is contextual speaking of pronunciation. That's good. I have two questions. First, this is good for local communication and local needs. But see, government has set targets for competition in job, international job for our students, for our graduates. So how would you deal with this issue in research? And second question is, you have talked about phonology, but I was unable to understand which role you assign to phonology in research.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Your question one is related to the international accent of English, right? Am I right?
International needs, competition for job market.
Yeah.
So there we could be, you can say international accent.
Exactly. So actually, you want to say that if Pakistani English is different than the international English, how is it going to work, right? So that's the question. I'm not proposing anything which is different than the international variety of English. I'm just proposing something which is based on evidence-based, scientific, authentic research that how our speech is different than other speeches, like our English is different than other Englishes. You know, like the mutual intelligibility is there, the mutual communication is there, so it's not going to be a different language. I just want to propose, let me give you one example. Like, we don't know that in terms of consonant clusters, what are the strengths of Pakistani students? Or also in terms of vowels, we don't actually know, we don't really have authentic data that how many vowels are possible to be spoken easily, comfortably by Pakistani speakers when they are taken into English classroom. So we need to explore, we need to know what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses. What are the weak areas and what are the strong areas? And how could we come up with something in terms of curriculum which is more effective for teaching English and which is more prestigious in order to make Pakistani English internationally acceptable? Because right now we don't have any data on it. So this is not the discussion that we are going to invent something new. No. We are to create this consciousness among Pakistani teachers and also this authentic data for Pakistani policymakers that we need to change the teaching methodology and the curriculum based on the phonetic repertoire of Pakistani learners. Right? Do you need one more example? Pakistani English. Yeah. Let me finish the first point. If you're not convinced, I can give you one more example. Okay, so just a minute. I want to say that we should establish a very authentic profile of Pakistani English where we could know that what are the features of Pakistani English which make it a different variety of English. And it is different than British English and American English. Are you getting my point? So that's the actual point, right? Like what clusters are possible, what vowel sounds are possible, and what are the the strong areas of Pakistani learners of English. So that's my point.
Variation.
Yeah. Variation is there. Like, sir, it is very similar to your look. When you go to England or any other international country, any other part of the world, you cannot really get rid of your structure, your skin color, your way of moving and your dress style. It is supposed to be there. Dress could be changed, yeah, but your look is supposed to be there. Similarly, your spoken is also supposed to be there with you. You cannot change it in a while. Yeah, so that's the part of your identity. So you need to work on it, that how could you establish a complete identity of your language, which is Pakistani English.
Thank you, sir. Now,
yeah, please.
You have mentioned phonology presentation. So, what role would you assign to phonology?
Yeah,
this is my question.
Yeah, phonology will remain the same, and I'm really glad to have this question. It's a very technical question, guys. Phonetic features, I'm exploring phonetic features. Phonetic features are based on articulatory features, that which sounds are produced from which parts of your cavity. I'm not proposing any change in phonology. Phonology is language specific, and I hope you know the difference between phonetics and phonology. Phonetics is physical, it is there. Phonology is rule-based. So we are not changing rules. In other words, the rules of Pakistani English would remain the same. Like there are 44 sounds in British English. So sounds would be there in Pakistani English. We are not introducing any sound. So phonology is the same, but our phonetic features are different. Getting my point? And I'm happy that you know the difference between phonetics and phonology. So the phonology would remain the same, and the phonetic features would be explored. You getting this? Right.
Non-verbal description of something.
Yeah.
You were general. You will give us an evaluation of Pakistani distribution. So that task will be performed. This is the ultimate goal of the
Some you yeah.
That is speaking together.
Sir, I'm glad that you know the difference between the two, but we are not going to change phonology. If we are changing phonology, then we are supposed to invent new vowels, new consonants. We are not inventing anything new. We just want to highlight that what are the phonetic features of Pakistani English. You getting the point? Phonology ये है ना कि अगर आप रूल्स को चेंज करें, अगर आप इंग्लिश की इन्वेंटरी को चेंज करें, देखिए सर मैं आपको समझाता हूँ उर्दू में. Please. There are 20 sounds which are vocalic in British English. You see, 12 of them are pure vowels, 8 of them are diphthongs, right? And they are based on English phonology, right? In British English. In Pakistani English, we are not proposing that we would pronounce 10 vowels and we would speak English. No. But our features are different. And those features are based on our mother tongues. We acquire English on the basis of 2, 3 other languages. Like your language might have been Punjabi and Urdu before you acquire English. So don't you think that there was a specific role played by your first 2 languages on your acquisition of your 3rd language? So that's the point of discussion.
Wonderful answer.
Very healthy discussion. So on a lighter note,
we can discuss it later.
Yeah. On a lighter note, I also came across one of the phonological features that I'm going to share with you. I heard someone was speaking like in the center of Jivan. So dear sir, is it error or variation? Seeing the letter of Jivan Tattva, is it error or variation?
That's variation. Let me express this in the other way around. There is a fundamental feature of human language, right? Variability of invariability. We are speaking differently, but we are speaking similar. And I hope you get the point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I think this overall scenario can be described in terms of language context situation. Because when English language context is put with one variety, when in language context is Japanese, we can have another variety. So in this particular scenario, can we say that there is no one variety of English, there is no one Pakistani English, rather there are many varieties? Yeah, thank you so much. One of the core purpose of this study is to know that how many variations are possible within English of Pakistani, Pakistan as a country. So one of the objectives is to address this question, that how many varieties are there within Pakistani English. And by the way, when we have such a large scale of population, we should not have one single variety. Like Lahori Punjabi is different than Faisalabadi Punjabi, and the Rawalpindi Punjabi is different than the Potwari is different than Lahori Punjabi. So definitely we have this variation, and this variation is supposed to be there. It is there, and by the way, we can explore this further, and we can also compare different parts of the country. As I said, that Lahori variety of English, then even Urdu is different. The Lahori Urdu is different than Karachi Urdu.
Thank you very much. We are running short of time. Thank you very much, dear Prof. So
I'm ready. It's up to Zaidi.
So last question from Professor Dr. Salim Saab. So he is our honorable teacher also. So yes, sir, please go on.
Yes, Dr. Kamal. There are 24 consonants and 20 vowels. You are not aware of this. We are also aware of something else that is called the concept of different. Is there any concept of different in Pakistani?
Diphthong or triphthong?
Is there any concept of different in Pakistani? There are
yeah.
Double vowel, and then the three vowels are their representative of that.
Yeah.
Is there any example of different or different?
Yeah. Sir, unfortunately, I don't really have data on triphthong, but there are diphthongs, of course. Diphthongs are there in Pakistani English. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. No more questions. We are running. Sorry, we are running short of time because we have to locate this house. So next, I would like to call upon. Thank you, my dear Prof. So you can discuss over a cup of tea once again. So Dr. Kamal Khan is himself going to join Dr. Samira. So this is what maximum I can do. Yeah. So I would like to call upon Dr. Islam for the concluding remarks of this conference. So please welcome Dr. Islam.
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Kamal's presentation has generated something. Concluding something with which you have such deep emotional attachment is always a difficult thing. And this conference is one of those things with myself and my other colleagues have a very deep attachment. Worthy and Honorable Dr. Shah Siddiqui, Dr. Shahzeh, my Dr. Aslam, Dr. Sikandar, my worthy keynote speakers, Dr. Abibullah Bhutan, Dr. Kamal, Dr. Umar, and Dr. Wasima Shahzad, and my honorable guests colleagues, my senior mentors, Dr. Omratin, Dr. Sleen, Dr. Shahid Imtiaz, and Dr. Tahir Imtiaz, and all who I can remember. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here, for making this event the way it is. I mean, it's you to judge it has been successful or not, but what I can comment is it appears to have been successful in generating some questions and in communicating some point of views, which must have been some years and will probably trigger some more questions, debates, and presentations in future. Thank you very much, all of you, once again. And it was not possible without your participation, without your contribution, and without your valuable input you have given throughout this conference. I think my concluding remarks would not be complete before or without I say special thanks to my team. And without them, this was definitely not possible. And bear with me for a few moments because I would like to name them and to acknowledge them. And it might take a couple of minutes, but I would request you to be patient. First of all, I would like to congratulate and thank you, my organizing committee, including Dr. Shafkat Hussain Zadi, Saida and Mr. Daffodil. Then we had a scientific committee. This committee not only evaluated abstracts, but corrected many abstracts to encourage better participation in the conference. Thank you very much, Dr. Shahid Imtiaz, Dr. Alan Mallet, Mr. Shafkat Hussain Dadi. Dadis have been everywhere. Dr. Hasnan Ahmed is Ms. Zakia Shazay and Dr. James Redmond. Then venue and event committee, Dr. Hasnan Ahmed and Mr. Jamil. We have registration and finance committee, which was obviously the more important committee. Ms. Mehwish Aslam, she's not here. She has her brother's marriage today. She has been with us for the last couple of days. So my very special thanks to her that she spared time for the conference despite such important family function. Mr. Krivankar and Mr. Salim. Then marketing and promotion team, Saida Lara Batul, Mr. Shafkat Hussain Dadi, and Orange Day. Then our very important IT committee, Hafiz Numan Ahmed and Mr. Rajabi. They managed all this morning stuff, and you can better judge how well they have done it. Thank you very much. Then conference proceedings and schedule committee, Mr. Imtiaz Ahmed. Thank you, Ida. You did a wonderful job. Ms. Fatma Dahan, Mr. Mohammed Faraz, and Ms. Shama Farman. Once again, thank you all, and I request you all to give them a big round of applause. Okay, I think there would hardly be any perfect things in life. So was this conference. There will be many things you probably would have thought could be better and should be better. And we promise you to do it better next time, inshallah. Do remember us in prayers. And once again, thank you all. And thank you very much for being with us. And before I leave this rostrum, I would like to just remember one other gang which were with us. The gang of, I'm sorry for using this word, the people, worthy seniors, Dr. Shafat, Yaka, those who chaired the session and who moderated the session, my worthy colleagues and some of senior students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear sir, for highly encouraging and motivating words. So I would like to call upon Dr. Tahir to come forward to express word of gratitude to the whole.
Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening to all. So it is just an extension of what Dr. Muhammad Islam has just said. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a unique day in the history of our department, and today is the third and last day of our first international conference, RICOLLAC 2021. So on behalf of my team, I convey my warm regards and hearty thanks to our worthy executive members, including the Chancellor, Mr. Hassan Muhammad Khan, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Anis Ahmed, Director, Lahore Campus, Mr. Muhammad Umar Farooq, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, Dr. Atiku Zafar Khan, and our dear consultant, Dr. Muhammad Islam, for making this conference possible. I also would like to thank all the honorable guests who are sitting here and who were here the day before yesterday and yesterday also, valuable national and international speakers and participants who graced the event with their online and physical participation. At the end, I would like to thank the conference committees and real faculty who worked day in and day out, our colleagues from the support departments, including IT, marketing, HR, academics, admin, operations, and finance, without whose support this event was not possible. So thank you very much for making this event successful. See you soon, inshallah, in the next conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tahir. And the final segment of this closing ceremony of today's conference. So I would like to invite our worthy keepers, Professor Dr. Shahid Siddiqui, to please come forward and give away the souvenirs to the keynote speakers. Professor Dr. Shahid Siddiqui, please. I would also like to call upon Dr. Islam and Dr. Tahir to please stay along with Dr. Shahid Siddiqui. I would like to request Professor Dr. Shahid Siddiqui to give away the souvenir to Dr. Islam. Now, Dr. Tahir. Next, Professor Dr. Habibullah Khan, please come forward and receive your souvenir. Professor Dr. Wasima Shahzad, please come forward to receive your souvenir. Now, Dr. Kamal Khan, please come forward. He is the most questioned keynote speaker throughout the conference. And he is satisfied with all the questions. Okay, now I would like to request Professor Dr. Shai Siddiqui to, Dr. Islam to give certificate to Professor Dr. Shai Siddiqui, to give souvenir to Dr. Shai Siddiqui. Dear Prophet, is just token of love. You are beyond all these souvenirs. Dr. Shai Siddiqui, it is simply token of love. You are beyond all these souvenirs. Now, for parallel session chairs, I would like to call upon Dr. Shahzeb Khan to please come forward and give away the certificates and souvenirs to the parallel session chairs. So, Dr. Shahzeb Khan, So, please give souvenir to Dr. Shahid Imtiaz. Dr. Shahid Imtiaz, please come forward to receive your souvenir. Dr. Uruddin, please come forward to receive your souvenir. Sir, center. Next, Dr. Shafat Khan, please come and receive your souvenir. Now, Dr. Snan, please come forward to receive your souvenir.
Dr. Snan.
Dr. Umar Farooq Sahab. Dr. Umar Farooq Sahab. Please, Dr. Umar Farooq, please come forward. I would like to request Dr. Islam to give away the souvenir to Dr. Shahzeb Khan. Thank you so much, Dr. Shahzeb. I would like to call upon Dr. Shahid Imtiaz to give away the certificates and souvenir. Yes, Dr. Muhammad Aslam, please come forward. Then Ms. Riphah Yasmin. Ms. Zakia Rashid, please come forward. Mr. Umar Azim. Dr. Priya Wes. Umar Azim. Thank you, my Dr. Haikus. So next I would like to call on Dr. Salim. Dr. Please come forward and give away the certificate to the moderators. So the first moderator is Ms. Humaira Noreen. Ms. Afshi Hassan. Ms. Namra Ashraf. Now I would like to call upon Ms. Shama. Ms. Priya Wes, please come forward and receive your certificate first.
Mr. Shafra Hussain Sethi, please receive your swearing. Ms. Sayyida Zahra Babu, please receive your swearing. Ms. Stella Jabin. Now I would like to request Dr. Umuddin to give away his souvenirs. Mr. Imtiaz Said. Mr. Jameel Akhtar. Mr. Kareem Akhtar. Mr. Hafiz Numan Ahmed. Ms. Shama Fatima, and that's me. Next we have Ms. Nargis Salim. Mr. Lawrence Akbar. Ms. Fatima Zahid. Mr. Muhammad Akif. Ms. Saira Rauf. Mr. Muhammad Faraz. Mr. Bilal Ashfaq. Now I would like to request Dr. Muhammad Islam to give away the souvenirs. Mr. Rana Basharat Faraz. Mr. Usman Ali Alvi. Mr. Aleem Ahmad Raza. Mr. Amar Rasool. Now I would like to request Dr. Sikandar to please come and give away the souvenirs. Ms. Arish Fatima. Ms. Bakhtawa Ijaz. Javed. Mr. Mubin Ahmed. Mr. Salman Ahmed. And that's all. Please everyone gather for the group photo near the stage.
Say thanks to Dr. Islam and his very young and vibrant team. Kamal, 1 minute please बैठे मैं थोड़ा सी appreciate करना चाहता हूँ the wonderful work they have done, and I think Dr. Islam, whether you know it or not, you have created history in Riphah University. And I think it was a very different conference in many ways. I could see representation from different provinces, from Sindh, from other cities. Islamabad friends are there, and I don't know how many, but I was looking at the program, and the model was very interesting. And I think we should also copy that model, the hybrid model, that a number of sessions were online, and there were some face-to-face sessions. And your team is really, I was the kind of gelling you have done, and that's the job of a great leader, that the leader leads from front, and that is exactly what you were doing. And for me, I think it was such a pleasant occasion to see some friends. I shouldn't say old, they are very young, evergreen friends, but I saw them after many, many years, and it was such an exciting occasion. Well, these kind of conferences are very important because, this century is the century of knowledge. And as one of the World Bank reports tell us, that the difference between a developed country and developing country is that of knowledge. And if we want to be in the list of developed countries, we have to create and construct knowledge. And that is the foremost job of any university. And Riphah University, as I think that you have set this tradition, that this creation and construction of knowledge is only possible through research. But just doing research is not sufficient. The dissemination of research findings is also very important. And there are two important means of that dissemination. One is through research publications, and second is through these research conferences which we are attending today. Just a couple of points that when we look at this journey of language and linguistics, I think, and I'm addressing the young colleagues here, that we need to do at least 3-4 things. One, that we should try to be more interdisciplinary. Gone are the days when these subjects used to travel in narrow alleys. This is literature, this is language. The time has come that we should derive insights from different disciplines. And only then we can have a fuller picture before us. So that's one. Second is that we should try to push the boundaries. And these boundaries could be that of themes and topics, that instead of getting content with the set of topics, try to explore new topics. And the second boundaries which need to be pushed is that of research approaches and methods. We need to get out of the set methods and approaches and try to look at some new ways and means. Like in qualitative, there are a number of ways and narratives and case studies, etc. So don't get content with just one method. And the third point is that our research topics should be relevant and current and contemporary. Like pandemic, I was looking at the program. Pandemic is one issue, but there are some other issues as well, so that our research should be able to address some of the social problems of our society. Another point is that as in any organization or university, we need to promote diversification. That if 10 students are doing research, maybe some of them should be working on policy-related research. Some of them should be working on, say, theoretical research. Some of them should be working on industry-related research. Some of them should be working on creating a new model. So that is another angle. Finally, I think your research should be informed by theory. That is very important. That you need to link your research with some theoretical model. And this, interrelation between theory and practice. Our theory informs our practice and our practice informs our theory. So sometimes you start with theory and you try to improve your practice. Sometimes you start with practice and you come up with grounded theory, as we call it. These were some of the thoughts. But I think what I need to say here is that I'm so excited. I'm so happy that this team has done such a wonderful job. And Riphah University and all the community of English language teaching are very proud of you. Thank you.